Hey everyone, welcome to a live roundtable edition of DevOps Unbound. DevOps Unbound, for those who may not be familiar, is a bi-weekly, or is it semi-weekly? I always get those two confused. It happens every other week. A video series where we talk about relevant topics in DevOps. We've been doing DevOps Unbound for almost 2 years now. And one of my favorite parts about DevOps Unbound is about once a month, we do a live version of DevOps Unbound, what we call our DevOps Unbound Roundtable. And why do I love it? It's because besides having the great guests that we always have on our DevOps Unbound panels, we have you, our studio audience out here with us participating. And when these things work right, they're golden. Because as good as our panel members are, our studio or our live, not studio audience, but our live internet audience, they really drive the discussion. They really keep us on our toes. We really understand what it is you want to hear about, what it is we want to do to do this. So, I always like to make sure the chat's working for everyone. So I'm going to ask everyone, if you want to type in it while you're here in chat, say hello from wherever you're from, because that's another thing. I've loved this ever since I've been involved in the internet since 1996, which is, it freaks me out that it truly is worldwide, right? It's not down the block or down the hall or down in the city or even in your state. It's from all over. So Mitchell and I are both in the Techstrong headquarters in Boca Raton, Florida today. I'm in Studio A. Mitchell's in his office here at Techstrong. But sign in where you're from. Ooh, Raleigh, North Carolina, Nashville, Tennessee, loving it. Los Angeles, excellent, everyone. Forest Lake, Minnesota, I've never been there, but that sounds good. Portland, Maine, a lot of American cities in here. Where are my friends in India or in Europe? Come on, I know some of Puerto Vallarta. Well, that's Mark. He's here with us. Sign in wherever you're from. Let's just make sure that chat works. I'm here. Yep. And thank you for joining. Speaking of chat, as I was saying, what really makes this interesting is your comments. So as we're speaking, if you have a question or a comment or a thought, or you'd like to throw something out at us that you'd like to see us explore, you can put it in chat. We'll see it. We may answer you in straight on chat, or we may do it, raise it to the panel and do it via video. Someone here from West Boca. I love it. West Boca High School. My older son went there. Welcome. So use the chat for that. Also, though, if you have a particular question or comment that you do want to raise to the whole panel, if you look in your communications window to your right, it says chat up top and then public presenter, etc. Go one level over to Q&A, and you will find the Q&A panel window in there. And when you put it in there, I know you want me to ask it of the panel, so I will elevate it to the panels for their comment on the video session. So use QA for that. Use chat as well. Either one is really going to work. Depending, but in chat you may get a chat back is the bottom line. I also want to remind people that towards the end of today's event, we're going to be announcing 4 winners of an Amazon gift card. We give them out at every event, and we'll announce those winners at the end today. One other thing: these are live, and anytime you're doing live over the internet, stuff happens, right? You may see panel members pop in and out. Maybe they've got a bad connection or they're coming in and out. I see Mark Hornby might have dropped here. Orange County, New York. I love Orange County, New York. Been up there many times. Dublin, Ireland. We were in Dublin last week for the Linux Foundation event. Mm-hmm. Anyway, let me introduce you. Well, before I introduce you to our esteemed panel, I want to just give a quick shout out to our good friends at Tricentis. I mentioned we've been doing DevOps Unbound for 2 years. We've only had one sponsor in 2 years, Tricentis. They have stood behind this from the beginning to the middle, all the way through to today and beyond. They help us. They help bring us great guests. They help choosing the panels and the abstracts and the ideas for our shows. They're a fantastic partner to work with. They're an even better company to work with if you need a testing solution or any of the other areas they play in. So check that out. Tricentis.com. Now let's get to our panel. So I'm going to start off our panel with someone who I've had the pleasure of knowing for, I'm doing DevOps.com, eight or 9 years. I probably know him most of that time. He's in Puerto Vallarta now. My friend Mark Hornbeek. Hey, Mark, welcome. Introduce yourself.
Thank you. So, okay, I'm basically Mark Hornbeek. I do consult. I have a little boutique consulting firm called Engineering DevOps Consulting, and what we do is consulting with large enterprises on DevOps transformations. Also do teaching and training on DevOps topics, as well as write content and things like that from my little office in Puerto Vallarta. I'm happy to be here. I've spent a lot of my career thinking about and working on the testing aspects of DevOps. So continuous quality assurance. TestOps is another good name for it, I think.
He's also an esteemed author. Check out Mark's book on engineering DevOps. So
he's also won awards from IEE for test engineering, and you're being humble, Mark. That's not like you. But hey, man, welcome.
No,
we're proud and happy to have you here. Next up, I want to introduce you to Harit Patel. Harit, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself.
Awesome. Thank you, Alan. I'm Harit Patel. I'm based in New York, currently in Portland. I'm a product guy. I love creating products and building things that help solve engineering, software problems in the world that we live today. Every company is a software company. So I've been fortunate enough to build tons of products in the past couple of years, but looking forward to help in the DevOps world and the TestOps world. So excited to be here.
Thank you. Harit, I don't know if I caught the company though, or were you not?
Oh, yes. I actually work for Tricentis right now.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Next up, I want to introduce you to Jennifer Velasquez.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jennifer Velasquez. I am the IBM Americas DevOps leader. I work with organizations that have enterprise systems to basically DevOps them. And I have the luxury to have that job because it lets me work with everyone and follow everyone's journey. Testing is a passion of mine because I feel like if you automate things and don't have things tested, it's your risk with no insurance policy. So excited about the topic today. Excellent.
And welcome. Next up, I want to, and this, I was saving this name for last because I'm going to do my best. We have Suman Kaparin. Suman, help me.
Yeah, close enough. Hi, hello everyone. I'm Suman Gopinath and I work at IBM. I am currently the chief architect for a set of products within IBM Z Systems. I don't like to say DevOps products because DevOps is not about products. It's about everything else. So I would say the automation part of things, and a big part of my job is to help customers understand that DevOps is not about technology, but it's about all of your enterprise systems. It doesn't matter if it's on IBM Z Systems. It can all go into your DevOps platform. A second part of my job is, because I do have all of these products, is to make sure that we have continuous everything within each of these products, and otherwise you're just preaching.
Absolutely. Suman, thank you. Thank you for joining us. And now, last but certainly not least, anchoring the panel as he always does for me, my co-host here on DevOps Unbound, as well as our CTO at Techstrong and a principal analyst at Techstrong Research, Mitch Ashley. Hey, Mitchell, welcome.
Welcome, panel. Welcome, Alan. Glad to be here. Anxious to get to our topic, so let's jump in.
Yeah, you know what? Let's get to our topic. I realize a lot of talking, we haven't done it. So, look, for those of you who registered to attend today's event, the title is Step Up Your Game with TestOps, right? And, you know, TestOps heightens testing's focus on operational effectiveness and continuous improvement across DevOps workflow pipelines. Blah, 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 blah. You can all read that on the webpage. But we're here to find out what exactly is TestOps, how can it help you, and how could you do it better? That's going to be the focus today of our discussion. It always helps us to frame who the audience is. If I want to know, right, if you work in TestOps, please go in the chat here. Let us, well, not in TestOps, but if you're working in testing, you're a tester, you're working in testing, let's hear from you. If you work in testing, go in the chat and let us know you work in testing. If you don't work in testing, go in the chat, let us know you have nothing to do with testing either. It's always a good way to see, you know, who's in the audience. While you're all doing that, though, Mark, you're the esteemed testing expert here. What does TestOps mean to you? How would you define TestOps to our audience?
Well, I'm not going to give you a succinct definition, but I would simply say that, you know, TestOps to me is very similar to what I call continuous quality assurance. In other words, it's the tight integration of strategically looking at, you know, the test skills, processes, tools in order to accelerate continuous delivery safely. So it's very much related to the continuous delivery movement, DevOps. But if you look at DevOps and break it down, every stage in the value stream has bottlenecks that are related to testing. So you got to get testing right. I often say, you know, culture is the door to DevOps, but continuous testing is the primary key to that door. So to me, it's the key to continuous delivery. It's the primary key. There are lots of other keys, but that one's essential.
Good answer, Mark. You know, I love what Mitchell wrote here in chat, right? As an end user, he tests every software he touches, so he's definitely a tester. That wasn't really maybe the testing I was looking for, but I appreciate it, Mitch. Harit, you work for Tricentis, worldwide leader in continuous testing. Mark says TestOps all about continuous testing. What do you think about TestOps?
I feel TestOps is slightly similar to DevOps, but very different as well. It's about the ability of running automated testing at scale, in my mind, and the collaboration with building software, testing and helping testers test the software, and also the operationalization of deploying and managing all of these different pieces that testers have in their tool sets. But again, in all, it's about continuous testing and helping make sure that you're enabling the ability to run complex test automation suites much more seamlessly and figuring out where the bottlenecks are.
Excellent. Jennifer, Suman, I wonder if you have any additional thoughts on that.
I know Suman's going to go on, so I'm going to do mine real short and just say it's all about the continuous testing for sure. But I always tell any organization I'm working with, it's the most complex piece. Because when you think about your software delivery, it has to have a target to go to. When we think about testing, you've got the testware, you've got the test, you've got the application, you've got the infrastructure, you've got all of the data to support it. So holistically, that's my insurance policy. And I like it attached to everything I do. And if I don't have that part automated, then ultimately I haven't hit the core element that a CI/CD pipeline is going to speed up and help us with our agility. Suman?
I agree.
Right. That part of what Jen said, right? I come from writing business applications. That's what I did for many years before I got into automation and everything else, right? And any large business transformation, any transformation, existing app, anything, if you don't have a good, reliable test bucket to fall back on, it's you're just hitting or missing things, right? But TestOps to me is really, to keep it simple, is to consider any part of test as just like you would do with the development of code. I mean, everybody kind of emphasizes on the fact that it's the application code, it's your product and everything that needs to go through the life cycle. But test your tests. Make sure your tests go through the same life cycle. Make sure your tests go through the same dashboarding. That overall governance process is really, to me, TestOps. Yep.
Yeah, I don't disagree there either. You know, for me to understand TestOps, you got to kind of look at the evolution of testing for me, right? Mitchell and I co-founded a company 20 years ago. He was VP of engineering and CTO. I was a little bit everything: sales, marketing, biz dev, product. We did a lot of things there. You know how startup life is. But we outsourced a lot of testing, and we did a lot of testing in-house. But this is before there was DevOps. It was just some silly thing we did at the end of our engineering cycle that just made us miss deadlines. You know, in many ways. There wasn't a good enough rhyme or reason to it. One of the great things about companies like Tricentis, for instance, is they brought this concept of continuous testing, automated testing. I mean, Mark Hornbeek, he's been a test engineer for probably longer than many of our studio audience has been alive, right? That the move to continuous testing, the move to automated testing really brought some rhyme and reason to testing. So to me, that was sort of the era, the dawn of the era of, you know, DevOps testing. When I think about TestOps, though, I think about taking that to the next level. Think about really making a lockdown process methodology in place that allows testing to keep up with the speed of DevOps, with the speed of business today. And to me, that's the difference between, let's say, continuous testing and TestOps.
Yeah.
Patel, what do you think?
There's a very interesting question, though, and I know it's not directly related, but I find that a very, very relevant question on why is testing the most underfunded area for companies, right?
Yeah, that's up in our QA section.
Yep. And I think it kind of a little bit ties back to what you talked about, Alan, that there is a progression. So there is, you start and then you go take it to the next level and so on. And there is also this notion of testing being, oh, you created the test, yes, move on. It's a wand, it's a fix. No, it is continuous investment. Sometimes you have applications, products that may not have any kind of automation. So you really need to invest in that, and that's going to pay off in the longer run. And so I think more about the fact that I wouldn't say it's underfunded. I think the expectation behind it's not a one-time investment versus it's a continuous part of everything else. I think that's sort of my take on, you know, this comment about why is testing underfunded. It's about having the right expectations and putting in time more than, let's say, I've invested this amount for this period. It's not just that, it's a continuous investment of time. And I think that's where the expectation is where we have to set for customers to, you know, get going.
I think the other aspect of that, though, is because it's not a deliverable, most want to funnel the funds, if you will, into what is actually going to be a deliverable at the end of the day. And because it is a supporting role in the quality element, it's just seen differently in terms of the allocation and the like.
Fair. Anyone else on you know, so I'm going to come at it from the other side of the table. I never ran a testing team. I never ran a development team, but I was an executive that had to fund the testing or approve the budget for testing. And I know from an engineering perspective, it's much like security. Do you ever talk to a security guy who raises his hand and says, they give us too much budget? I don't know what else to buy. They give us, no, every security person I've ever met in the world moans and groans that security is underfunded and that's why they can't do a better job. It's the same thing with testing. No one raises their hand and says, geez, I have extra dollars in my testing budget because we didn't spend it, right? As an executive sitting at the table, I think we give too much money to testing a lot of times, right? Shoot me, prove me wrong. You Harit, I'm wondering, you're a Tricentis, you have a different view. What do you think about that?
No, I think that's true. I think like every organization and team always requires more funding and be able to kind of grow. And from a testing perspective as well, I feel there are these instances where we aren't able to highlight problems with our tools and our integrations and collaboration. Mostly it's about process. And that's where people sometimes confuse between test management and test ops, where test management is primarily about problems with defining testing, organizing it, all of that. But when you look at test ops, we never talk about technology problems. Like how quickly can we test this little piece of code and make sure it's providing the proper risk coverage? Are we focusing on and comparing test coverage to directly code coverage? So it's like it's figuring out what is the problems and surfacing it, which I feel sometimes a lot of teams struggle with.
Excellent.
I don't know if you guys can hear me, but I had a comment.
Sure.
Yeah, I think one of the problems is that I think a lot of executives see testing as a non-value added activity and don't realize that, it's at the root of almost all of the delays, or at least half of the delays in a value stream typically. And there's so much return on investment if you can accelerate testing. So it's always, any automation project I've been involved in with testing has always paid back very, very high ROI, but it's not always apparent to the executives why it would be, because testing in itself is kind of a non-value if activity, right? If you could get to test verdicts without having any, expense, you would do it.
But don't you think the area of DevOps and that the idea that organizations are now on DevOps journeys is bringing light to that topic, i.e., how much time is being spent in testing? Because previously, I saw organization after organization say, I've got, here's our deadline. We're just going to squeeze testing. We're going to squeeze testing. There was no recording of that. There was no reporting or other, because they didn't have value streams like they do now.
Part of the issue, I think, is we're not bringing forward the value that testing is delivering. Often that's kind of just recorded in terms of how much testing got done or what percentage of our quality gates we meet, but we're not bringing forward. And I think it's, part of our own fault to not bring forward the real value, which is shrinking the time, which is saving money, which is real dollars. And, it's the time element, I think, that is where the ROI is. And so what we really need to teach people and do is to get to the result of testing quickly. It's all about testing verdicts, frankly. Right? Testing is irrelevant if you don't resolve it to a verdict. So we should be teaching people and really thinking about, how do we get to verdicts quickly at every stage of the pipeline? It's all about verdicts, the result of testing. If you don't get a verdict, there's no point in testing. So how do we accelerate getting to verdicts? That's what I believe.
Mark, I think one of the things that's really, we're kind of hitting on in different areas is that I'm going to paste a link to some free research that folks can get. It's the role of testing in DevOps. It's actually was sponsored by Tricentis. That's not why I'm putting it out there, but it's a very recent study. There's some interesting things about it. And when we start talking about DevOps and doing automation, we can talk about the testing that we're doing and the quality improvements that it's making and the outcomes. The other thing that I think we can enhance, maybe we don't enough, is how automating testing, it both increases coverage and increases speed of delivery of software. Right now, we don't necessarily want to automate everything, but testing doesn't have to be a bottleneck, quote unquote, like I think many of us have probably felt at times. Either we are feeling that way or we thought test was that way. But I think in a DevOps world, it's a much better environment to highlight not just what we're testing, but how it's improving getting software out the door, and really good software.
Right. One thing though, I know, so metrics is as a rabbit hole, and for now, I don't want to go in there, right? Because you can spend hours doing metrics that have no meaning, and that's a different. We need to get the right metrics. But personally, from our own point, one way, right, and it's not the only way, but one way to get management look at testing. One of the things we did is to have an actual OKR, which was based on that we're going to bring down the number of cases, and when I say cases, that's something a customer would raise after a product goes live, right? And we will not have, or we will have only this many. But indirectly, for you not to have that many, you need to have good testing. But when you represent that, that sort of becomes, oh yeah, that's a valid point. Rather than I say I want to build more test automation and I want investment for it, but I kind of relate it to what does that mean?
Agreed. I kind of started. I feel like I kind of started this thread, but when I said as an executive, I felt like we spent more than enough on testing, right? And then Mark responded saying, "Look, you got to be able to show value, and a lot of times it's very hard to show the value in testing." I have a friend, Andy Ellis. He was chief CSO at Akamai for 20 years. And Andy's thing is choose metrics that matter, which is, I think, Suman, very similar to what you're saying, right? Choose metrics that matter. The problem is matter to who, when, and what, right? And I may choose metrics that matter to me as a tester that really don't matter to a manager or a developer or a security person or what have you. I think that is an area where users kind of rely upon companies like Tricentis or IBM to say, hey, what are the metrics that matter? What are the metrics that matter? Mark, look, you're doing this a long time. What are the metrics that matter?
One of the things in that area that I'm always talking with clients about on their journey is what matters today may not be what matters tomorrow. So that it is, when we think of metrics, you have to continuously improve where you see or measuring your value. So it may be the number of defects or issues that are raised with a product, especially if it's a new product. But maybe we've trended down and now we're in some anomaly area. So now maybe it's what resources we're consuming and how much, how long is it that we're spending in test in relationship to the other things. All of those things are going to be based off of what that organization is trying to improve. When we have so many metrics that it becomes noise, we negate needing them. We want to keep that succinct where it's value add.
Hey,
Yeah,
Mark, you're
hear you,
kind
Mark.
of coming in and out. I'm sorry. Jennifer, I think you're right. Mark, if you could hear us and respond, what do you think are the metrics that matter?
Well, I don't want to do an advertisement because I'm doing a webinar on this next week on metrics that matter, believe it or not. But, clearly the metrics need to be tied. There are so many possible metrics. They need to be tied to your business strategy. The strategies are generally going to be in 6 categories of benefits. So there's going to be like agility, quality, efficiency, stability, security, and satisfaction. So what is the core of your strategy? And make sure that the metrics align to that strategy. You can possibly measure everything, but very few people do. But you want to really zoom in on what is it that really matters. Quite often it's agility, right? Lead time, frequency, the things that really matter that are going to, if you focus on that, will get you the other things anyway. But you may have a different focus depending on what your business strategy is. So make sure that you have metrics that align across the organization at all the levels, according to whatever your strategy is. So, and that does require that you tie those different parts of your organization together in some kind of, common data lake, and make sure that you can then serve that up to the different stakeholders in a way that they can action it according to the strategy.
Sure.
And I want to add something on there as well. One of the things we talked about around metrics was, I think it's a time to start talking about testing slightly differently, where typically when we talk about test results, we always present it as a binary choice, like yes or no, passed or failed. 87% of tests passed doesn't mean anything. Like, there needs to be some talk about confidence levels. Like, are we confident in some of the tests that we're running? And I think some of that discussion changes the talk about how things are successful and how we can operationalize overall testing. So that could be an additional metric we add on the list of business outcomes.
Yep. I mean, because 87% of tests pass, 13% fail. That's what that means, right? And, 13% is not as big as 87, but you have 13% failures out there. You have a really, I'm reminded when, Dragon Dictation first came out years ago, and they said they were 90%, 87% effective. And it sucked. I mean, in all honesty, having to retype 1 out of every 10 words was not fun. I'd rather just type it already. So you're 100% right. I mean, you need some context around that. Suman, you had jumped in here as well. The other thing, though, I've heard this across the board in testing, IT, security, is the people doing the work have one set of metrics they use, right? Because they get it. They're cool. They know it. But now we got to dumb it down for those idiots up above us, right? The managers and the board and the C-level folks, they don't get it. I don't know how the heck they got those jobs. But we got to dumb it down and we got to use a different set of metrics that make sense to them.
Yeah.
Is that true? Number one. Not that they're dumb. I don't think they're dumb.
No,
but,
they're not.
How do you translate, right? And that oftentimes, that's the hardest part as you become managers in your career. You find that that's one of the hardest things you got to do, is be that translation layer between the people doing the work and the people you report to.
Right. I think that forms the key, because and you need to sort of think about how, personally to me, I've spent a lot of time thinking about why should this matter and what is the ticket I have. Like, customer satisfaction is a great tool to use, right? But it may not be a greater tool, though it should be, than sometimes sales. So we have to use the right tool to drive the metric forward. That's really something that I would suggest, because there are always a set of OKRs that an organization will measure, and if you can tie your metrics to those OKRs, and that needn't be the job of, I don't know, a developer. It should come out from the pipeline itself. It's not a manual task of saying, oh, this is what it is. But if I can tie down my metrics to say, but this is a measure of this, which is my OKR, I think that's a good way to represent it. On the metrics, though, one of the, and I think probably in Mark's session, that's probably going to be a great insight into that. One of the issues I have with metrics is, if somebody has to spend a lot of time collecting that metrics, then I don't know if that metrics is even worth, measuring, right? If it's automated, it has to be automated, and it cannot be subjective.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, sure.
Yes, we hear you, Mark. I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry, I don't want to stomp over you. Just go ahead.
No. So I was just, I'm sure your webinar is going to address some of that, right? What metric could be subjective, but the way you look at a metric just cannot be subjective. Then you lose the purpose of the metric.
Yeah, I would only comment that, remember that metrics are not a goal. Metrics are a measurement towards achieving a goal.
Yeah.
And honestly, a lot of folks, what I notice is they spend a lot of time just kind of creating the glueware, the technology to make the metrics and then to make them visible. But it's equally important to make it visible. What do you do with them when you got them, right? So I'm actually spending a lot of time with the client right now, explaining, like, okay, if you get this score and this metric, here are some things you can do to make improvements towards whatever their particular goals are. The job isn't done when you just present the metric, and that's true for testing along with other dimensions, that we care about. But, it's all about how do you use the metrics to make improvements.
Agreed.
I think one of the other elements when you think of the topic that you brought out, Alan, in terms of the layers in the organization and what someone may be focused on, there are going to be certain metrics that I would say are not those that are tracked at the product level, because they are for my role and responsibility to the team. But that's another trend that I'm seeing changing, in that the team is now seeing and having a common goal with the product, instead of I have my silo, my piece, and as soon as I deliver it, that's all I really care about. If we don't meet the objectives of the product that we're delivering, we've all failed. And that's where we start seeing a more holistic view in terms of the metric and trend and what action we take, because that becomes important to our subject area. And we haven't had that in the past, at least not with the organizations I've been working with.
Fair enough. Hey, I got to just interject real quick. I want to announce the gift card winners. Lizzie A, Victor E, Melissa A, and Jorge D. Our team will be in touch with you. You're our lucky winners today. Enjoy it. Buy something nice on Amazon there. You know, Steve out in the audience wrote in something about here that Google acts that way. I don't necessarily believe that proof should determine if you can pull back or not. Right?
Yeah, we were having a conversation and
I saw part
yeah,
of a bigger
about,
conversation there.
yeah, testing less sometimes.
Share it, Mitch.
Yeah, there's a school of thought. I think it's small but growing, which is the more you increase velocity, testing everything becomes less important because you can respond quickly to fixing things. And I'll give you an example that I think might be a valid example. I might want to get an MVP product out to market, and having it run perfectly is less important, or near perfectly is less important than getting customer feedback. I want to experiment. I need to know what people think. I want to know how they're going to use it. And if there's a few errors and bugs along the way, I'll take it. Unless it's not, not so bad, it's not going to work. That's a pretty clear example, but I think there's a growing school of thought of delivering at higher velocities gives you some flexibility on testing. Not everybody believes that, but I think there's something to it.
So that my comment was on, you cannot stop following rules because now your accident rate is 0, right? So that's why there was a Google comment on the fact that Google. So that's the whole. I think the whole
we're all
Google
Google
comment.
testers, right?
Yeah. So.
But I think that gets back into what are the goals of the product that you're delivering. If that is in the leniency of what you can do, then maybe a smoke test suffices. But if your brand is at risk, we can't have that risk. We've got to have the amount of testing. Now, what's the right amount, especially as things continue to grow in complexity and the amount of tests we have continue to grow because we have now engaged in automated testing? That's something you've got to triage and figure out what's the right amount. It's an art to some extent. Hopefully, if you can go that fast, though, from an agility standpoint, maybe you can get all of your tests weed in. But that's, I'd say, case by case that we have to look at.
Yeah. Mark, you made a comment in chat here about defects are not a good measure of quality. Usage is what's important, right? So, look, the title of this is Step Up Your Game with TestOps. Why is defects not as important as usage?
Simple analogy. You have a line of code. I can think of a million reasons it doesn't do what I want it to do. I have a line of code with a system with a lot of bugs, but it does everything I want it to do. It's not about defects. It's about usage. Does it do what your customers want it to do? You can find a million defects. How many of them are relevant to the usage? So don't test just to find defects. Test strategically to find out whether the product meets its requirements from a user's point of view.
But that could kind of change our whole metrics argument on its side, right? So we really don't care about how many defects. We want to know, is this thing being used? And of course, until I release it to the public, I may not really understand usage that well, right? So how does
Well,
that
this is
work
what,
in a DevOps environment?
that's why we do continuous delivery. We will have a pretty clear idea of how things are being used and whether it's usable as we do the continuous deliveries. You don't wait for the big bang and then find out that you had the wrong idea of usage. So this is where DevOps, I think, fundamentally adds so much value to the world, is that, you know, you can get fast feedback of the actual product very quickly without having to worry about doing a whole lot of useless tests that really don't matter anyway to find defects that don't matter. You know, I'm a strong proponent of saying a lot of our coverage metrics are wrong, right? They're focused on code defects. Nobody cares about the code. They care about the product and the service.
So as a security person, though,
Mm-hmm.
I think it's important, right? Because you may not care about that code until that defect in the code allows someone to steal your bank account money or your Coinbase account or what have you. Right. So I think defects do matter. I really think, as Steve wrote in his thing here, it's a question of risk management. Right? Is
Well,
that defect in my code what risk does that expose me to?
security is a different category. I used to make a mistake of thinking security is a subset of quality, but it's not. It's a completely different level of consciousness, right? You have to think about the fact
That
that
sounds
people are
really zen-y
deliberately
to
and
me, but
maliciously.
you
No,
know what?
it's not zenny. I mean,
It's not a level of consciousness either. It has to be built into everything we're doing today. How,
no, what I meant,
go ahead.
what I'm trying to say is the mindset for security is a little different than the mindset for quality, because you now have to think about, you know, what is a value to protect for even beyond the life of a product potentially. That's a different mindset. So certainly for security, there's no such thing as 100% security, just as there's no such thing as 100% quality. But if we're talking quality, you know, defects is not a good measure. If you're talking security, you know, it's all about just mitigating risks. So you're going to do as
That's
broad
what
a
it's
scan as
about,
you can
managing
afford.
risk. It's not
Yeah,
necessarily mitigating, it's managing it. You know, we got a question here
yeah.
from Melissa. How can we make the mindset, and it's right in line with what we're talking about, Mark. How can we make the mindset change with leadership when they want to do regression tests with the same stuff all the time, for example, and when might not be relevant anymore or won't help identify real failures?
I have a question the other way. Is that really a leadership thing, right? I mean, on what to test? Because your regression test bucket should be something that, again, goes through your continuous enhancement process. And
well, I think it goes to what's the role of leadership? Should leadership be in here telling you, oh, I need more regression testing? No, my thought is leadership wants to know, hey, what's the quality here? What's the usefulness?
Yep, I agree.
Right? I don't know how far in the weeds they get.
Yeah.
I think it also goes back to what I was mentioning earlier, is the confidence level. Leadership might just be looking for a yes or no, everything passed or failed, or I'll be successful. But I think it goes back to confidence level in our testing. If we feel as testers and test managers that all the confidence level in what we just tested with our selective regression build, then we should be supportive of that. So I think it's a discussion with leadership to change that thought process, in my opinion.
I think it comes down to risk. I mean, how much risk am I willing to take on as the executive responsible for this portfolio, this product, this whatever? Their name is tied to it, and depending on what kind of thing didn't get tested or didn't get caught from a security standpoint, that follows them forever. So that's where you have those that are risk adverse, and they're probably going to push the full regression buckets. Others that are a little bit more entrepreneur, they're going to go after and say, if I have those core use cases or the like done, then I'm going to take the risk on those other elements that we've done well always in the past. I don't think those need to be tested.
I mean, Tim in the audience, I think, said that well, Jennifer, too. Real simply, use risk to focus your testing. Melissa in the audience had another question or another statement, which was to avoid delays on and deploy. This is classic, right? Why did we decide to do this testing, not that testing, or make a decision to avoid delays on deployment, right? And that's always been the lament of testers, right? The developers, the bosses, the board, they want to get, back to the Phoenix project, they want to get the software out, and they won't give us enough time to do the right testing. We want to avoid delays on deployment. In a world of continuous testing, DevOps, and feedback, is that still true? No one?
There's a follow on, which says better testing will reduce the risk. And I noticed what you said, though. You used the word right testing. And I think that's a better word to tell that, the right testing. And going back to what you should test is, yes, it should be on use cases, but that needn't necessarily be measured by the most number of uses alone. It should also be what is the impact of that, right? So it could be features that get turned on very rarely, but it probably impacts an entire, stock market. So what is the impact of that functionality also adds on. And I think I would sort of agree with you, Alan, and what you said. Yeah.
Anybody else on that? Right? Testing versus delayed deployment.
I'm going to join in. I'm going to join in on this, and I'll use an analogy in the SRE world, another part of DevOps. A lot of discussion about, is 5 nines the right measure? Is reliability, uptime the right measure? Well, if it's the wrong software, it doesn't matter, right? You can have 5 nines, but if it's not doing what it's supposed to do, it doesn't matter. Same thing in testing, right? It's not about precision. Don't apply an engineering discipline to it to drive it down to, finer and finer levels of measured quality per se. It's are we delivering the right functionality at the right time at an acceptable level of quality, risk, etc. It's all about what's acceptable, because nobody has the resources to do it perfectly, and it can't be done perfectly. There's no such thing.
And depending on the type of software that we're talking about, it's all going to vary in terms of what those answers are to all of those questions.
Yeah. The Moon Land Rover is a little different than the software running on my website.
Yeah. And I would also say when I go to do something with my bank account, it better not zero out. I mean, that's important to me as a user. I'm just saying. So that kind of testing, I always want to see in a system.
Fair enough. I don't want to see it zero out either.
Let's not have that happen.
But it wasn't a facetious question, but I was almost asking it rhetorically. I think that anything we do that delays deployment has to be justified. There has to be a really good justification. If it's going to mean I'm releasing software later, I'm releasing functionality later, I'm not moving as fast as we can. I'm not saying we should never do that. I'm just saying there's going to be a damn good reason.
But I think you have to look at what is that length of period that we're talking about. If you're able to run your complete pipeline and your test in an hour, 2 hours a day, how is that impacting the end user community? Did you lose market share? Did you lose significance by having it at the end of the day versus in the hour? That's all going to come back to what was the product in question to begin with. The automation and bringing automation to our delivery to drive efficiency is radically changing the game. And I think whether we're talking the testing, the security, whatever, they are all options. We got to get the right balance in so that we get that efficiency and agility in the delivery, but we balance it with the risk that we're willing to take.
An argument I may have with you on that, Alan, on the delaying of a release is, again, it's not to do with the faster time, but it's to do with if I have a new product or a new functionality, it might be better to go on a beta mode to get faster feedback before I do a full release out. And in that perspective, I think delaying a release so that suppose a beta tells you, no, you're not there yet because that's not what is useful to a customer. Delaying release to get more feedback from that niche set, depending on the product where it is, that I think might be a valid reason. And of course, all the beta cycles are still going through your automated pipeline process.
Exactly.
But
that deployment of the beta is exactly, I mean, I understand you're classifying it so that we have a limited audience in terms of the visibility. But again, what you're doing with the beta, maybe you set different profiles for your automation as a result of it being a beta and not something that's formally released.
Actually, guys, this is why at the beginning of this talk, I was saying that we have to approach this strategically. I mean, what is important? Make sure you get the things tested before you deploy that are really critical to whatever your strategy is. But then don't forget that there are some strategies also for deployment that allow you to do testing in deployment, or at least as part of the deployment process. So, probably the best practices, the feature flag deployments where you can turn a feature on or off for a select group of customers to test in production. You can also look at canary testing. That's a little more sneaky and blue-green and all that. But, some of those tests you can allow strategically deciding which tests are you going to do in deployment. Don't slow down the pipeline, allow it to go ahead as fast as possible. Just make sure you don't, start with something that is already flawed. So, concentrate your tests accordingly throughout the pipelines. So that means that you really need to know what tests you have available for every transition of those pipelines and organize your tests accordingly, depending on what's the likely risk of that particular change going through to deployment. It requires some intelligence and strategy.
Okay. What else?
I feel like everything that everyone's saying goes back to testing is an art. It's not something that is easily. It's not exactly like, oh, we make this change, go test this one piece out. You have to think about so many different scenarios: the business impact, the customer impact, the user impact, the security impact. So figuring out which tests we do is definitely an art.
So when I hear people, go ahead, Mark. I'm sorry.
I've got to take exception to that.
Me too. I was going to, but I'm glad you did first. Go ahead. Why?
I think one of the most disservices to the entire industry in the world was the Art of Software Testing, the seminal book by Glenford Myers back in the 70s, where he had some axioms that said it's a conflict of consciousness for a developer to test his own code. Instead, he should have been saying, no, we need to make sure developers know how to test and equip them with the means to do it. And that's an engineering problem, not a problem of art, in my opinion.
Sure.
Well, my issue is when you tell me it's an art, you're saying it's an art, not a science. And if it's not a science, it'll never be continuous and automated and done enough to keep up with the science of DevOps, if you will, or the science of software development. I think what you're citing, Harit, are many factors that we need to put into some sort of formulaic, equation that allow us to dial in.
No, I 100% agree with that. And I say that is an art because we're continually evolving how we test, and we're learning new things which will help us build that science. So it's a combination of both, but at the crux of it, you will always have new things that you're adding to your automation, to your operationalization, making it complicated.
I'm going to come to your defense, Harit, and add to this I think another way to interpret what you said about it being art is you can't take the human element out of testing. You can't just automate it. You can't apply AI heuristics to it and say that's it. Oh, that's all we need, because there's humans on the other side using it, and they're going to do stuff that we never anticipated. And we need the creativity and the thinking beyond, engineering process and discipline. What do we need to think about that we aren't? And that's where the human has to come in and also think of new ways of improving it. So I think that that's the artistic part of it, is the creative and the expression that we as people bring to it, as well as what technology can do repetitively extremely well for us. Did I do a good job defending you, man? Are you okay? You feel good? I got your back.
I'll take what Scott is saying. It's both an art and a science.
Yes, it is. Hey guys, I just got that noise in my AirPods that's telling me they're out of juice. So I may lose you here. We're about at the top of the hour, so I'm going to use that as an excuse to sign off for today. I want to thank our audience, especially a lot of the people, Teresa and Scott and Ian, and some others who really participated. Appreciate it. Most of all, Mark, Suman, Harit, Jennifer, thank you for coming on and making this a great discussion. Mitchell, as always,
absolutely,
man, you did great. Big extra shout out to our friends at Tricentis. This was one right in their wheelhouse, so I was happy to have this out here for them. Thank you all. We will be back with our regular kind of DevOps Unbound recorded panel in another 2 weeks. And then we'll be back on another roundtable within the month. So check that out. I think Mitchell put in the questions. If you go to DevOps Unbound, you can check out past episodes of DevOps Unbound and stay on top of the latest. But for now, then, this is Alan Schimmel at Techstrong. On behalf of Techstrong TV and DevOps Unbound, thanks for joining us, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.